Okay, we are live. This is a video where I critique Nicolas Cole's video on Gumroad. So this isn't really a critique of Nicolas Cole per se, but it's also a critique of the video that's created by Gumroad for their podcast. And the whole point of this is to look at this advice, I guess you could say it's advice provided by Gumroad, and to give my perspective based on my 3 decades of internet experience. And let's just start out by saying I have not watched this video yet. I don't know anything about Nicolas Cole, so I'm kind of unbiased. I am, however, familiar with Gumroad. I was familiar with Gumroad when it started, and the claim to fame for Gumroad, really, the beginning was that you could promote your product to other people within the Gumroad ecosystem. I mean, that was one of the benefits, really. And I believe they still have that feature. I think they get something like 15% if someone else gets upsold. Like if, let's say someone signs up for violin lessons and they buy your product about something else, I think the other person gets 15%, and then you get the other remaining portion of the profit. Anyway, so I'm looking at this title. Hold on, I gotta turn off my other speakers. Okay, so the title I thought was interesting because this is about maybe creating your own niche market. And that has a lot to do with content creation, which is something I'm focused on right now. And what I like about the word category instead of niche market, it just has like a broader appeal. A lot of times it's better to use 4th grade words instead of like high school level words. You'll be able to reach a larger market, which reminds me of a video I watched last night, which was interviewing a guy that had just recently learned English, and he was selling a product, and it didn't really seem like it hurt him very much that he did not know English very well. And I would say that's one of the advantages of not having a large vocabulary, is that a lot of people will be able to understand the words that you're using. If you use more advanced vocabulary words, a lot of people won't understand what you're saying. So this is kind of a trick. It's not like a hard trick, but in a way it is a trick to reach a larger market. Use simpler words. But, sometimes those bigger vocabulary words can be good for marketing purposes in terms of like search engine optimization. And maybe you will capture a more sophisticated audience if you use bigger words. Anyway, that's a whole long tangent. But I think now it says creating your own category. I haven't watched the video yet, but I'm just going to assume it's about your niche market. But I don't know yet. We're going to watch this. So that's all I got to say so far. Oh, and obviously Gumroad has created this content for its podcast and for its channel here in order to get people excited about creating products on the Gumroad platform. And if people watch this video and they think, oh, I can create my own product and be like Nicolas Cole, then, if you get inspired, that's adding to Gumroad's bottom line. You could also think of this from the perspective of, hey, I'm not Gumroad, but like this format, it's the format here, 2 people talking one person's the interviewer that works for Gumroad. The other person is sort of like a client slash partner. But let's just, for the sake of argument, these could just be any two people talking, having a conversation, and that's one way you can create content for a membership or a program, or for a paid course, for a paid information product. If you like creating content where you have like a back and forth dialogue between two people, I mean, sometimes that's a lot easier because you don't have to be thinking the entire time. You can kind of like take a break and listen, and you don't have to spend all of your time thinking and talking and thinking and talking. And you might get some ideas for what to say next, because, you know, while you're listening, you could be coming up with like new ideas. Now, I think this particular interviewer, I've only seen him one time, but it seems like his goal is to find out what their thought process was at the beginning of the content creation process, because really that's where Gumroad picks up new business, is once they capture those new people, and they want to get those new people inspired to create products, because without them, you know, they don't have their platform's not going to grow, other than just like nurturing the existing creators that they have. And in a way, this is kind of like a nurturing thing, because, you know, Nicolas Cole, I'm assuming he was a successful user of the platform. And so now Gumroad is giving him recognition. And by giving him recognition, it's like it helps both of them, because Gumroad is not only getting more signups in general, but like, let's say you go out and buy Nicolas Cole's product, Gumroad is going to get a percentage of that, or at least that's going to bring new users into Gumroad's ecosystem. And then also Nicolas Cole gets a credibility, reputation boost. He gets his name out there. He can put this on his resume, like, I was interviewed by the Gumroad podcast. You know, like, it is kind of a big honor to be, you know, interviewed by a company like this. And then, you know, that increases his reputation and makes him feel better about using Gumroad. Like, yeah, they're giving me recognition. They're driving more sales to my product. I feel like, you know, if I was him, I'd be pleased to be interviewed by Gumroad. So it's like a win-win situation here. How would you do this? You know, I don't know what platform they're using. I think there is a platform called StreamYard. I think it's called StreamYard. I'm not sure, but I'm wondering how they got this like kind of a cool little drop shadow in front of the video. Like, did they just use a tool that does that automatically? I think there is a tool that does that. And I think it's called, I could be wrong, I think it's called StreamYard. I don't know. But you could also do this with Zoom. You could just do like a Zoom chat. It's not going to look as pretty as that. You could go ahead and do like the video editing to, like, you know, add the title there at the top and everything. But I wouldn't go to that extent unless I was like a multi-million-dollar business like Gumroad. I'm just maybe I'm just lazy. Or you could use OBS Studio. You could do this with OBS Studio. I'm sure there's some kind of masking tool where you could, like, this could be maybe a layer above the video. I'm sure there's a way to do that with OBS Studio. I just haven't learned how to do it yet. Anyway, let's just play this. This is a 42-minute video, so this stream could end up being kind of long.
If you don't keep your promise, you piss the reader off. If you do keep your promise, all of a sudden the reader goes, thank you, I love you, and I want more.
Okay, I'm just going to say in general, this isn't about Gumroad, but I hate it when podcasts do that little introduction. It's like a little clip of like what they thought was the coolest part of the interview, just kind of to grab your attention or something. For some reason, I find it annoying because it's almost like you're wasting my time because I know I'm going to have to hear him say that again somewhere in this video. So I don't know. I always find that annoying. Like, if you don't think that's annoying, go ahead and leave a comment. But I would rather just hear the interview from start to finish. I don't want to hear clips. This is not broadcast television. Justin
Hello,
Nicolas.
everyone, and welcome to the Gumroad podcast. I'm your host, Justin Nicolas, a senior writer at Gumroad, where I deconstruct the tactics, strategies, and processes of top creators. Each week on the podcast, I interview creators and digital entrepreneurs who are at the top of their field. On this week's episode, I interviewed digital writer Nicolas.
You know what's funny about this guy's background is like he's got this poster of these butterflies, but they're not real butterflies. It's just like a picture of butterflies. So I don't know. I'm just kind of wondering, okay, is this guy into catching butterflies? And if so, like, wouldn't he use real butterflies? But if he's not into catching butterflies, then why does he have this picture here? Like, maybe it just kind of matches his wall color. I don't know. I just think it's kind of it's an interesting choice because it makes me wonder what is the deal with that? Like, I don't know. It's kind of funny, but I do like this little painting back here. It's sort of like a really abstract looking kind of impressionist style painting. It's I don't know. It's a kind of a cool background.
Cole, creator of Write the Ship and co-creator of the Ship 30 for 30 writing community. We talked about writing well on the internet, creating your own category, ghostwriting, and more. I just loved Cole's insights, especially about writing. Enjoy. Today on the podcast, I'm happy to have Nicolas Cole, and I know you go by Cole,
Yep.
So I'll address you that way. Cole, thanks for being here.
Dude, thanks for having me.
Yeah. And I've been chatting online for a while. We're kindred spirits, fellow writers. You started at the age of 17 writing. You're a gamer, and you had this terrifically popular blog. Then got into bodybuilding and started to create content around that. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your story and how you've risen in this steep ascent since then?
The non-linear ascent.
Just a random comment. I think it's kind of cool that, once someone becomes a successful internet entrepreneur, like, who cares about cutting your hair or growing facial hair? Obviously this guy's not ready for like the corporate interview. He's made it on the internet, supposedly. So, hey, you can look however you want. That's the luxury. That's the luxury of being an internet entrepreneur.
Yeah. Many lives. I was a pro gamer as a teenager, wrote about it, had a big blog around that. Got really into bodybuilding when I was in college, wrote about that. I mean, that's how I built another audience all around health and fitness and all of that.
Including
and then also created my first product that way. Yeah, I had this Quora.
All right, I'm also looking at his door, and I'm thinking maybe this is some kind of office that like he rents, because if you're working at home, I don't know if I've ever seen a door like this, unless this is like his backyard or something. But a lot of times office space, like if you lease an office, a lot of times the doors look like this because I don't know, I guess they don't want you to be I mean, there needs to be like a little bit of transparency, I suppose, like when you're leasing an office, because mm, they just want to kind of keep an eye on you, I guess. I don't know. But it is kind of, it doesn't really matter, but I just think the door is kind of making me wonder what's going on here.
Answer. I started writing on a site called Quora in 2014. And I had this Quora answer go crazy viral, which was the question is it possible to change so much that you no longer recognize yourself? And I put this before and after picture of me as a teenager. I was undiagnosed with celiac disease. I was really underweight. I was constantly missing school. Like, I had a very difficult childhood because of that. And then I had this picture on the right of me like 10 years later as this shredded bodybuilder that looked like I had eaten my former self, like just could not be more different. And I was explaining the differences and the similarities between the two. Wrote it in 20 minutes, put it up on Quora, went front page of Reddit, did 1 million views in like 2 days. And that I'm just my email, I just got bombarded with questions. What's your workout routine? Well,
that's an interesting story. And it probably went viral because a lot of, I mean, I remember there were a few people, one particular guy I can remember in my high school that was really skinny, and you could tell he was insecure, and he was hanging out with, like, he was a year behind us, but he was hanging out with older kids. But I remember seeing this guy like a few years later, and he was, just like one of these huge bodybuilders. And apparently, I don't know, because like in that time period, he went from being a little shrimpy kid into like this giant monster. And I know there are some guys in their teens, like maybe they hit puberty late or something, but no matter what they do, they cannot gain any kind of muscle or any kind of weight, like no matter how much they eat, like they're still skinny kids. So I could see if you saw a picture where like someone goes from the little guy to the big guy, and like that would be compelling because you'd want to see, how to make that transformation. But at the same time, no, I'm not saying that this guy's not a good writer. I mean, he obviously had some talent there that he could, or maybe he didn't have talent, but he had that experience of putting something out there on Quora and then having it kind of go beyond Quora, because then it got onto Reddit. And so I guess you could say it sort of went viral. I mean, that having an experience like that where you're getting a whole bunch of email. I mean, I've had that experience before, and once it happens to you, I mean, it's kind of like you think, hey, I could do that again, or I could build on this. And I think Andy Warhol was one of the first people to recognize this when he said, everyone in the future will have their 15 minutes of fame. Meaning, like, Andy Warhol, I guess, was speaking about television. I mean, at the time, television was a new technology. And to be on television for 15 minutes, I mean, that was like a big deal. But now with the internet, the network exposure, the network effect is like 1,000,000 times greater than television, because you get more than 15 minutes. I think it's interesting that he got this attention from Quora, because Quora is actually pretty hard to get recognition on there, because there's like a paywall or something. Like every time you go to Quora, that stupid annoying thing pops up where it says you can't see the page because you have to sign up as a member or something. Now, saying that, I think there was a time period when Quora first started, or they didn't have that like paywall. So it's possible his thing went viral on Quora like before they put up that kind of sign up page. But that's interesting that he got some recognition from Quora. I had very, very small success with Quora. I think like I answered a few questions. There was a time period where answering questions was really popular. Like even LinkedIn had a questions section on their site, and people were really disappointed when LinkedIn pulled that down. But I think what this was like around 2009 or 2008, that was really popular. It was like a gold rush to have people ask questions and then get the answers. And actually, that's when Yahoo Answers was created to milk that whole concept. And one of these venture capitalists, Jason Calacanis, had his version of this, which was called Mahalo. And he'd pay you like some kind of micro payments in order to answer questions on his platform. But what happened was, supposedly Google said, "Oh, we don't want all of this. What did they call it? They called it content farming. I think they called it content farming." And they said, "Oh, we don't want that." So they passed the Panda and the Penguin updates, which were supposedly designed to penalize anybody that was kind of building these like user generated content sites. But I guess, sites like Quora still exist, whereas a lot of them went out of business, like Mahalo went out of business, Yahoo Answers went out of business, I think. I just want to say, this always bothers me when I talk about it. Panda and Penguin ended up penalizing the wrong people. Like I never had one of these question sites. I was always making my own content myself, and I ended up getting really hurt by Panda and Penguin when I think what happened was there was this whole. This is really on a annoying tangent, but there was a time period where people would just steal your content and then they would post it on their site, but then they changed the timestamp so that it looked like they published it first. And Matt Cutts, the head of the spam team, actually admitted that this was happening. And he basically said, "Hey, there's nothing we can do about it because, there's no way for us to know who created the content first." And I even saw people, they would steal my content with the copyright notice. Like a copyright notice was actually stolen. That was so frustrating. Anyway, that's why I recommend, if you're going to write something, it's a good idea to like mix some kind of self-promotion into your content. That way, if people steal it, they're also stealing your self-promotion. So you don't get upset about it because you think, "Oh, great, well, you can have that content, but because it's promoting my business, so steal it as much as you want to because it's helping me." Even though these people are using their own advertisements and getting ads. But anyway, let's get back to the video.
What do you eat? What's your diet? And that was my first real realization that I was probably 23 years old, 24, that if you understand what questions people are asking, that's how you create products. That's how you write things that resonate. You have to understand what question you're answering.
Yeah. So this is the thing that when I profile a bunch of Gumroad creators, this is, I think, the thing that sticks out in every one of their stories, that they consistently start getting asked similar questions that they don't have the bandwidth to answer individually. Yep. And therein lies the opportunity. And King of Solid has called it something like, that's the market imbalance, the spillover that you start to notice. Mm-hmm. And there's a market demand then that you need to fulfill. And you are a market of one, or rather, you have positioned yourself to be the only person who can answer it to their satisfaction.
In the way that either they want answered, or in the unique way that you're able to frame the problem. Because that's the thing, is a lot of people ask similar questions, but the person who gets rewarded for answering it usually frames the problem or frames the solution in a different way. And so, for example, the way that I framed myself, the reason why that core answer hit, the reason why my email started getting bombarded, was because I didn't know this at the time. So there's 3 different kind of body types.
All right, I'm just going to say the reason why someone is going to believe a complete stranger on the internet is because, first of all, they could see the results and they know it's real because it's not being it's information that's not being promoted or sponsored by some big company. It's just, some random guy on the internet is more believable and more authentic than someone that's sponsored by like some kind of diet plan, like the Nutrisystem or whatever. Weight loss is like one of the top most profitable niche markets on the internet. If that's your thing and you manage to lose a lot of weight and like that's your passion, then hey, I would say go for that market. If I wouldn't go for that market just for the money, because it's just wrong. But any kind of body transformation, I suppose, is a really profitable business. I was looking at the Beachbody company because I posted something on LinkedIn about the beach. Someone on my LinkedIn said she was talking about workcations. And then I said, well, workcation's not so bad if you're at the beach, right? Then within like a few hours, someone from the Beachbody company emailed me and said, hey, we're looking for a developer. So this happens a lot of times. Like if you type something into LinkedIn, you're going to get people interested in you for like all kinds of weird reasons. I just happen to like the beach. And then, so the Beachbody people contacted me, and then I was looking at their business, and they're making a ton of money. I mean, it's ridiculous. They're making a lot of money. They're making so much money that they're like giving money to like several different charities. And I just, it's interesting. Like I don't really have any interest in those markets. I mean, I am interested in sort of like the beach lifestyle market, and I toyed with that a little bit, but I wasn't able to make it stick. But yeah, that is something that I'm interested in. But the kind of diet plan or exercise plan type of stuff I don't really see myself going that route. But I have nothing against it. If that's what you're into, if you're into fitness and creating like fitness videos, that's a great niche market to be in. But I'm so I still don't know what. Obviously, Nicolas Cole started to see that there was a market for what he was doing with his own body. His transformation kind of got attention. And another thing is, like, he had the photo proof. Like, I think that's really compelling. So before you start out with, like, let's say you have this idea, hey, I'm going to create this body transformation course, you have to be willing to take the before picture. You have to be willing to put that embarrassing before picture to get that saved before you start. So, and when you start out and you're not looking good, you have no credibility, but you still need to show the process of when you weren't very good, when you weren't very impressive. And even though you don't have the results yet, you still had to be thinking about the future. Like, hey, I need to document how I started, because that's going to be really, really valuable in the future when I'm trying to sell this transformation. I can show people, look at where I started and how bad off I was. Like Ty Lopez always talks about how he started out his business from he was living on a couch in a trailer. A lot of entrepreneurs talk about this. Like Gary Vaynerchuk always says, wouldn't it be amazing if Jeff Bezos had documented his like career from the beginning? Like if he was blogging every day, but all we have is that one photograph of Jeff Bezos like looking like a dork with his spray painted logo on his like little cheap desk that he made out of a door or something. And that's just one picture. So Gary Vaynerchuk just says, what a, missed opportunity there. Like, wouldn't it be awesome if we had the documentation of how Jeff Bezos like got from where he was in that, from his humble beginnings to his, giant success. I'm not really a huge Jeff Bezos fan, but I could see if some people are going to be fascinated by how the most successful people are making it from zero to success. So anyway, let's get back to the Nicole's story.
We're testing my fitness. No, I haven't thought about this stuff in 8 years, right? There's ectomorph, endomorph, and mesomorph. Okay, these three kind of body types. And when you're an ectomorph, you are me. Like I weighed less than 100 pounds as a senior in high school. My metabolism was through the roof. Like you have no body fat. You know what I mean? Like your body's just churning all the time. And so in order to put on muscle for that type of body type, it's extremely difficult. I was eating my body weight in chicken and rice and broccoli every day. Like the amount that I had to force feed in order to put on weight was like astonishing. And so when I would write about these things on Quora, basically I was niching down and I was saying, I'm not an endomorph, I'm not a mesomorph, I'm not pretending to know anything about that, but I am a hardcore, naturally born ectomorph. I have a very hard time putting on muscle. Here's how I did it. Well, every email that I got was from every kid who's also an ectomorph going, my metabolism is through the roof.
Didn't I just say that at the beginning? Like I definitely knew people like that, and they would complain, no matter what I eat, I'm always like a string bean or whatever. And their family would make fun of them and say, oh, don't worry about it. One day you're going to slow down. And yeah. So there's definitely demand there for people that are impatient. I think they're just impatient. Like, don't be so impatient. Just, you don't have to grow up all at once. Just anyway, that's my opinion. But then again, I wasn't a skinny kid either. So, I mean, I was definitely the mesomorph. So I didn't have any problem building muscle. But I could see that he found a niche market that was very interested in like, hey, how do I get these muscles? Like I'm waiting for muscles. I'm going through puberty. When will I get some muscles?
how do I put on muscle? So it's the framing of the problem where I go, your problem isn't you want to put on muscle. Your problem is that you're an ectomorph with a metabolism that's rampaging like a T-Rex, and you don't know how to eat enough to put on muscle. That different framing makes the person go, you understand the problem that I have in a way that other people do not. Yeah. So if you take that thinking and apply it to anything, all of a sudden then you get into the category discussion, right? He who frames the category, he who frames the problem is then the one best positioned to provide the answer.
Okay, and that's a good point, because then you can look at, or I could look at anyone who's impatient about where they are in their business, like target the market where people are impatient about getting to where they want to be. And then you could just create all of your marketing content around that sort of like frustration, like, well, you're stuck in this position where you're not getting the success that you want, and you could attain this level of success and you're so close, but it's like you don't know what to do to get there. I think that is a good way to think about it. Just like the struggle.
The thread that I want to pull on in this conversation is moving from that point as a creator, if you will, to establishing a legitimate and sustainable business around a market demand that you can fulfill. So let's say, for example, you're a creator who thinks, let's just craft a product, build it, publish it on Gumroad or some other service for $10, and you try to make money from that. I know that you're deeply thoughtful on the fact that it's a much broader conversation than just that, to actually establish yourself in the market and then create a business around it. So I would love if you could just unspool for a while on that topic.
Yeah, so there's a handful of things that you just said that we have to like really slow down and look at the nuances of the language, because this is what everyone says, and it is misleading thinking. Okay, so this idea of you notice there's demand, you notice there's a market, and then you create a product to fulfill that demand. Okay, this is a little bit flawed, because what you're really doing is you're saying, hey, someone else already created this thing and it's working, and I'm going to see if I can come in and take my sliver of it. There's existing demand, which means there's an existing category. Well,
all right, I think that's interesting. This guy has my attention now, because I'm thinking, well, that is true. That is true. That's how people look at business. I mean, I think that's the way business is taught in business school, where, there's a market there, and you look at the market and you say, hey, I can get into that market too. So it's sort of like a jump on the bandwagon kind of thing. And there are a lot of people out there, they're just not creative, and all they can do is copy, because they just don't have ideas of their own. But they do know how to pay someone to copy something. So if they see someone successful, they think, well, that person's successful, I'm just going to copy them, and I have some money saved, so I'll just pay this guy over here to copy what that guy's doing over there, and now I have the same business pretty much. And because my business is pretty close to what that other guy's doing, or what that other girl's doing, now my business should share the same success, especially if I can, reverse engineer how they're doing their marketing and so on.
If there's an existing category, someone had to have created that. And so whoever created that probably owns it. So at best, you're walking into someone else's game saying, I hope I can take my sliver, which is what most people do with a $10 ebook or whatever, a product or whatever. The thing is, it's not about catering to existing demand.
I just want to say real quick, it's not always a problem to go into a market that's already crowded, because a lot of times that creates even more success for everyone in that market because now you've got people that you can share ideas with, and you can, like, if you have communication with that other business that's in your market, I wouldn't necessarily think of each other as competitors. You could be thinking of each other as like a source of ideas, and you might get your best you might get your best the ideas for making money from your competitor, and your competitor might get their best ideas from you, and then you could even like refer business back and forth sometimes. So it's not always a lose-lose situation. A lot of times it's a win-win. And like when there's two or three or four people in a niche market, a lot of times that's going to gain more traction in the media. Like, for example, take the Impressionists. If it was just Monet by himself, if he didn't have like a little community there of other Impressionists, then you never would have had the Impressionists. It would have been like, oh yeah, there was this crazy guy Monet that was like a sign painter, and he did his little crazy brushstrokes, but it never would have been this thing, the Impressionists. The same with like all of the other artistic movements, the constructivists and the pointillists and the cubists and so on and so on. Like, you got to have more than one person for it to become like sort of a movement. And so there is that benefit of being in a crowded market. And hey, then you can have a convention, and then people come to the convention, and then you're bringing new people into the whole ecosystem, and it just grows from there. So like, I wouldn't. Anyway, let's just see what he has to say.
There was no existing demand for people who wanted to rent out their living room to a stranger who was going to stay in their house, right? There was no existing demand. Airbnb creates demand. And so when you're creating a product or you're creating a service, what most people do is they go, this market exists and boy, is it catching fire. I want to try and create something that fits into it so I can take my little sliver. Okay. And that's a rat's race. It's a loser's game. It's like you're showing up to someone else's party, being like whispering into everyone's ear, being like, I throw really great parties too.
That's a good analogy. Yeah, it's like considered bad taste to advertise your like, let's say specifically for art shows. I heard that once. Like, it's bad taste to promote your art show at someone else's art show. It's just like, you shouldn't do that. But from my perspective, it's a lot more fun to create a unique business that no one else has thought of. I mean, for me, it's about doing something that's unique and fun and creative. So I don't know if people necessarily have a choice. Like, either you have that personality. I mean, is it possible that you could learn how to be more creative? Yes. There's a book called The Universal Traveler that might help you be more creative. But I'm not sure. I'm not saying it is a personality type, but I do think there are certain personalities that are more comfortable copying what other people are doing. And then if everyone was the creative type that always created new niche markets, I think we would be. I don't know if that's a good thing, that everyone was creating their own unique thing. Like sometimes I think you need to also have people that are good at going into an existing market and then developing it and nurturing that and saying, hey, I can go into any business and like make it work better. So it's just different people have different talents. Some people have a talent for creating new businesses. Other people have a talent for developing existing businesses. Like I remember hearing John McAfee say that once his business got to a certain size, like it wasn't fun for him anymore. So he hired a CEO and he said, "Okay, I'm out of here. Like you run the company. I don't want to do this anymore." I think there's definitely a lot of founders. I think they call them like serial entrepreneurs. Like once you create your first company, you exit, hire your replacement, and then start the next company. That's even taught in business school. They teach you should always be trying to like hire the person that's going to replace you so that you can move up to the next level and either start a new business or like, become like more of the administrator of the people that are below you. Let's just keep going.
It's pointless, right? Instead, what you want to do is you want to go, look, I have a different awareness of the problem, or I am aware that you're experiencing a problem that hasn't yet been framed, or no one is owning this unique thing that you're struggling with. I'm going to frame the problem, and then I'm going to educate you on all of the things you're currently experiencing.
Okay, when he's talking about framing the problem, I think he's mostly talking about marketing. So just because he's framing the problem in a different way, it doesn't mean the product itself is very different. You could have two products that are exactly the same, but then he frames it in two different ways. Or you could just have one business where you're framing different problems with the same back end. But anyway, what's he saying about this?
That you would no longer experience once I solve this unique problem for you. And that's very different than tapping into existing demand. Now you're creating demand and you're creating the value because you're educating the person on the difference between where they are and where they could be.
So he's talking about sales and marketing.
And this is like the single point of failure. This is where everyone goes, I want to create a product. What market is catching fire? Right? Okay, well, you're going to show up to someone else's game and at best take 1% of the market. At best take 20% of the market, right? But you're never going to be the king. You're never going to own it. So instead, you want to look for, gather data by understand what problems are people experiencing. Sure, learn, iterate. But once you notice something, so in the bodybuilding example, right? I notice ectomorphs have a very specific problem. No one is framing that problem. I named my ebook series Skinny to Shredded. It's a different problem, right? You're skinny right now, but you want to put on muscle, which is very different than you're fat and you want to lose weight, right? Which is where like 99% of the focus for everyone else was. So all of a sudden now we frame a different problem and everyone goes, oh my gosh, I didn't know I had that problem. I'm a skinny person. Now I want this too, right? So it really is, there's so many nuances here.
Yeah, I guess in that case, what he's describing, the product might be different from the skinny product compared to the overweight product. When I could see where those two solutions, because like when you're creating the content and the back end to sell, you obviously want to show someone who's skinny building muscle. You don't want to show someone who's like trying to lose weight because then the marketing doesn't really connect with the product. So in that case, yeah, you would need a completely separate product. I mean, maybe uh, in terms of the like kind of fitness, like would the actual exercises need to be different? I don't know. Um, yeah, I think probably the exercises would be different too because a lot of times, let's say heavy people can have huge muscles. I mean, there was like a guy at my high school. He was definitely obese, but he won the push-ups. No, not the push-ups. He won the weightlifting contest at our school. Like he did. He blew everybody away with the bench press. I don't know. That's a random tangent, but
that get just glossed over, and people are like, I want to find product market fit. All right, so you're going to go try and fit your product into someone else's category, and you're going to be considered like a next best alternative to the category king.
yeah. And okay. So he's saying two things. Well, one is that the smaller market isn't necessarily less lucrative if you're like the only one that's really addressing that smaller market. Like if you'd have the first mover advantage. You're the only one that's really connecting with those people, and then your competitor will have a hard time adapting their content because you have like this kind of first-hand knowledge because like let's just say you're a skinny person that's building muscle, then you might know things about that transformation that other people don't know. Yeah, looks like my connection is having some problems. Anyway, I think another thing he's pointing out here is that then I didn't really think about this very much before, but your marketing needs to really integrate with your product, because if the two things aren't integrated really well, then you're gonna I think people will be confused, disappointed. I mean, they're gonna buy the product and think, okay, I was promised the marketing said, hey, I could get shredded from being skinny, and then the product obviously needs to deliver that. So it's not like you can just change the marketing without changing the product. Sometimes it really needs to it needs to match up. And I think there's a lot of people in business that just think, well, we can just change the marketing and the rest of the business can just keep running the way it's always run. I mean, it's like a separate department. Like there's a lot of companies where the marketing people might be in a separate building and they have really no connection at all with the people that are creating the product. So, those two different functions maybe could be a more successful if there's more integration between there's more coordination between the product back end and the front end marketing. And then how do you do that in your business? I don't know. It's going to be different for everybody.
Let's do a case study.
Okay, that said, I think what he's suggesting is that you need to think about marketing before you create your product, because if you created your product first and then you come up with the marketing plan and you decide, okay, we're going to do the skinny marketing plan, and your product wasn't really designed for that. Now you got to start over and create your product from scratch. So, that can be really frustrating. I was thinking it's best to create your product first, then think about marketing and sales, because it's really hard to sell something or to market something that doesn't exist. But I can definitely see the advantage of doing the marketing first and then creating the product. There's going to be advantages and disadvantages to both strategies, but I think he makes a good argument that doing your marketing first is going to be beneficial.
Here on Ship 30 for 30. So the ordinary thing you would do if you entered into the Twitterverse or the online universe and said, I would like to motivate people to write, to put themselves out there. And Ship 30 for 30 is so brilliantly conceived because the copy that you use on the Ship 30 for 30 website, after you read that website, it's like it is impossible to say no because of the value prop that you're offering. But Ship 30 for 30 was so unique. It's like everyone talks about shipping product and shipping product consistently, but doing it for 30 days with these atomic essays, which were branded. It's tell that story. And were you there present at the creation?
Dickie created it. I basically helped him take what he created and then poured gasoline on it. But he was smart, and what he did that was smart was it was a different awareness of the problem, right? Imagine if he said, I'm launching Ship 30 for 30, become a better writer. That word actually means nothing, right? That actually means zero. Instead, he goes, I'm going to be specific about the problem. You can't write every day. And every writer on earth goes, yeah, you're right. I can't write every day. And he goes, well, that's interesting because I've created a solution to help you build a daily writing habit. Now, every person is going to sit there and go, that is so weirdly specific. No one's going to be, the market for that's going to be so small until you realize that what category creation is all about is finding a specificity that is universal.
I love that.
So all throughout this, I want to share some little like neon signs. Like when you notice this, like this is
universal specificity. Yeah, that's pretty clever. Yeah, sort of like what Seinfeld does, where he finds those things that are funny that everyone instantly identifies with, but nobody ever made a joke about it before. But then once Seinfeld makes the joke, then everybody remembers Seinfeld. After that, like once Seinfeld identifies something, then every time you see that, you associate it with Seinfeld, which is really clever. And I'm sure I could think of some funny examples, but let's just continue with the video.
This is what's happening. Okay. So a neon sign that I've learned, anytime someone says that's too narrow, that almost always means that is actually the thing that is so specific that it's universal.
And this sounds weird, but it would be interesting to see how many business ideas you could get from watching comedians pointing out funny problems. Because, like, if what this guy is saying is true, that these like universal problems that are very specific, that everyone has, or almost everyone has, if you could come up with a product that's kind of relates to that particular problem, I don't know. I mean, it would be maybe it's just a way to kill time and procrastinate, but you might actually benefit from having a little notebook there while you're watching your comedians and see like what kind of crazy business ideas you could come up with.
Because when you're so narrow that it's uncomfortably specific, That's what triggers the emotion. But what most people do is they go, I'm creating this thing for everybody. It's a writing group for everybody. Well, another good friend of mine, great copywriter, his name's Craig Clemens, he was the one who taught me, okay, if you try and write something for everyone, you write something for no one, right? And so then the second big mistake that people make is they go, okay, well, I'm going to be different. We're this that currently exists, but better. We're this that currently exists, but we're cheaper. We're this that currently exists, but we're smarter. We're more intuitive. So anytime you hear a word, when they're explaining the thing they're creating and they put the descriptor before it and they go, this is an ER word, better, faster, smarter, cheaper, or more, the most, all of these are comparison statements. And you can only draw a comparison in reference or in context to something that currently exists, right? So
Yeah, I agree with that. And it's a bad business model because, like, let's say you're an Amazon reseller, and I know there's some people that are really, really good at that. They think it's an awesome business, but if something happens to Amazon, you're out of business. So it's always risky to get into a business that's completely based on another business, unless that thing that it's based on is like super rock solid. Like, for example, Bitcoin. I mean, I think Bitcoin is it's pretty much a sure thing at this point. But I wouldn't build a business on some kind of new cryptocurrency that really has very little chance of success. Uh, anyway, that's a good point.
they don't realize they're doing is they're saying, this is a better way to write. Well, the person who reads that subconsciously is asking themselves, well, if you're saying that you're better than something else, what's the thing you're referencing? Because chances are the thing you're referencing is actually the thing that I want. I don't actually want you because you're trying to convince me that you're better, but I want the real thing. And so instead, right, notice the Ship 30 statement is not a better way to write. The Ship 30 statement is build a daily writing habit. Absolutely. You are naming the specific problem, which is different than saying, hey, this market exists and we're better.
Yeah, I could see that happening in the software world where, for example, I specialize in WordPress, but maybe I shouldn't even be talking about WordPress. Maybe I should just be, I'm actually moving out of that market, but yeah, that's a good point. Like, if we just focus on the problem and the solution rather than the name of the software, the name of the software could be the thing that's confusing people, and they might just think, hey, I don't really care what the software is called. I just want to get from A to B. So yeah, it's another way of being too technical. Sometimes when you're too technical and you think about things in terms of technology, you're losing your market because people that want to buy from you, they don't speak that language. You got to speak their language, which is usually a fourth grade language. Like I was saying,
Loser's game, category creation.
Totally agree. Are there any meaningful counterexamples that you've run across where people are just inherently better, more prolific, more talented, work harder, didn't have to create their own category? Or does the category creation actually come in organically, even if you don't try to create your own category, if you're just constantly participating and responding to feedback? And
so, yes. So the times where better, faster, smarter, cheaper, all of that works, it can work, but it works for a small period of time, right? Because you're better for a moment. And then what happens when the next better comes along, right? So it's kind of like it's not that it.
Yeah, look at Amazon, for example. Their business model supposedly was just like sell everything as cheap as possible. But Amazon, well, they were successful for different reasons. One was, they started with books, which, that was sort of like a niche market. But then the other, I think the other reason why they were so successful was because they had an affiliate program. And I don't think the affiliate program was really, it wasn't really a solution for the end user other than providing more information about the products. So I think that was Amazon's other advantage, was if you wanted to get the most information about a product, you could either go to Amazon.com or read one of these like Amazon affiliate reviews, where the affiliate would write a really detailed, exhaustive explanation of, or maybe like an endorsement of that product that you wouldn't get anywhere else. But yeah, so the affiliate program was sort of like the killer app, but from the perspective of marketing, it was really just about providing more product information than the competitors, which, that's a simple way of saying, that's that's a good way to sell products, is to provide lots and lots of information that you can't get anywhere else.
It doesn't work. It's that it does work, but then you're caught in a cycle of you have to out better the next person who's trying to better you. And then like, you're not actually, you know what I mean? That's a very different and more frustrating game. On the other hand, you have people that do this accidentally. So they don't actually know how they created a category, but they do it just kind of based on intuition and based on whatever. So Jack Butcher is an incredible example, right? Whether he consciously knew it or not, he didn't say better value. He said visualize value. That's a specific modifier of the thing, right? And it's not this exists and I'm comparing and I'm saying I do the same thing, just better. He's saying, no, there's value that you read, there's value that you listen to, and there's value that you visualize. And if you're here for the visualize value, that's what I do. So he created a category without even really sitting there and going, this is what I want. And now no one on Twitter can make a graphic without someone commenting and saying, oh, this looks just like Jack Butcher's stuff.
Absolutely. By the way, very few people know that Jack wrote an article for the Harvard Business Review about this process. It was brief, but he wanted to share his thoughts. And one way he put it there that he very rarely has talked about on Twitter is he simply wants to make intangible things tangible. And you, in the process of doing that, you're sort of inventing a very distinct language and space for yourself.
Yes.
And clearly and I think that was preceded though by like a decade of experience helping other people brand themselves. So it came when the time was ready and ripe for him to really break out.
I have no idea who Jack Butcher is, but that does sound interesting.
Completely ready for it.
Totally.
Yeah.
And however you get there, right? Like some people do it accidentally, some people do it consciously. We're kind of skipping straight to the like, here's the game shark, like here's how you beat the game, here's the mental models for it. But notice the difference between what you just said. He's trying to make the intangible tangible, right? That's a category. That is a thing. Versus, hey, tangible, intangible objects are really popular, a lot of market demand. I'm going to make better tangible, intangible objects.
Yeah.
Those are two completely different things, right? And when you're playing the better game, you're trying to tell other people, hey, look at all these features that we have that are better. Look at all these things that we do that are better. When you're playing the category creation game, you're educating people on the difference between the old category, intangible objects, and the new category.
Well, you could also do both, because you might see a lot of times when there's a new category, it just opens all kinds of new markets, and that one that one company might not be able to uh, fully serve all the different possible markets that were opened up by that new idea. So an entrepreneur might go look at a new business that's successful, and they might say, wow, that's really cool, and like now I see a market within this market that's not being served, and that this company is focused on, what they're doing, but I see an aspect of this that that's not being served. So you don't, just because it's related to, just because you got the idea from that business, it doesn't necessarily mean you're trying to make it better or dependent on that other idea. You could just serve. You could find an idea within another idea. So it's not, they're not mutually exclusive.
Oh, I've made them tangible. What does that unlock? What are all the things that come with that?
Yeah. So like he just said, like sometimes a new idea unlocks all kinds of new potential. And then that maybe that business that discovered that new thing, maybe they're only taking advantage of like 25% of that market. So, you know, and maybe that new market has needs too, because now you've got all these people doing this new thing, and they might need add-ons or integrations, extensions, and so on, support. So, one thing leads to another. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to copy someone and then, try to be better or cheaper.
This is like the great secret.
The next step to studying and learning is like studying, learning, naming, creating the framework, publishing the framework, and then you are then associated with this category of one. There's no one else named it that. And if you can do that several times in a row in iteration and create a series of big ideas that are all like in one philosophical column, then you really own something that is.
So this is what I call languaging. So languaging is the strategic use of language to change thinking. Okay. So it's not just words for the sake of words. Okay. So if you go down this path, if once you frame a different problem, you create the category. So let's stick with we're turning intangible objects tangible. Then the second thing Jack Butcher does or should do is he goes, I'm going to use languaging to reinforce the category from where it was to where I'm taking it. So I'm going to call this framework the turning the intangible tangible framework. And here's how it works. 1, 2, 3. So now he's picking words that are naming the thing that he's playing with, where then every time the person reads it, it reinforces, oh, this is the category. This is the thing. This is.
Yeah. And that's the dream, right? Where you coin the term, and then everyone thinks about you after that point. Like William Gibson coined the word cyberspace. So whenever someone thinks of cyberspace, they think, okay, it's William Gibson, and he created his cyberpunk trilogy, and and then people buy the books because they want to learn more about cyberspace and what all that means. But it's a good challenge, but it doesn't always work because you might come up with the term cyberspace, but then some other group comes along that's like a little bit bigger than you and they're more influential, and maybe they're not even aware that you exist, or maybe they know that you exist, but they just think, oh well, we're just going to steamroll over this guy because we're bigger, we're more, we've got more money, and we can call it, computer space or whatever. I mean, it doesn't. They might be able to just change the term, and so just because you define it a certain way doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be able to own that forever, because they might just have more resources than you. So you have to have some kind of a following. Otherwise, your terminology or your language, like what he's saying, your language is not going to catch on unless you have some traction in the marketplace. And that's always difficult. And that's the reason why startups raise money. There's two reasons. One is that if you can start hiring a lot more people than your competition because you raised money, then you're going to have the network effect of all of your employees and all of your employees' friends and all of your employees' family, and everyone that you hire is going to be like supporting your idea and talking about your idea. And then the smaller company that's just bootstrapping everything on a shoestring budget, whatever they call it, that one or two people working alone in their garage, it's going to be really hard for them to compete against this like other company that did the venture capital route. They've got now dozens of employees that are all working together on social media, boosting each other's posts. And not only that, but the VCs, the venture capitalists, they have rich and powerful friends that run other startups, and they're going to say, hey, I'm invested in this startup. Can you guys over here, like we invested in this company over here, can you guys like give our new company here a boost? Like, can you help them out? And so now you've got all of these other companies helping each other out, like these really powerful, influential people, giving that new company a boost that they wouldn't have if they, financed everything themselves out of their own pocket. So, that's one advantage of taking that venture capital money, even though there might be some strings attached. If you're trying to do what this guy's saying is create your own category, you're going to need some kind of market traction. Otherwise, you're just going to be overlooked. Like, and this happened to me. I came up with this word called ferrodynamics, which meant to carry change. And I had this like statistical tracking system built, and ferrodynamics was sort of like the way of describing this new way of presenting statistical information, which at the time was called metrics, and then it became analytics. But before analytics, I called it ferrodynamics. But the analytics people, they had an association, so they had the whole analytics association. And even though I was a member of that association in the beginning, um, obviously the term analytics, at least I thought, was really similar. Pretty much, the term analytics was pretty much exactly what I had described ferrodynamics to be. I mean, I'm not saying I discovered ferrodynamics. At least to me, it seemed like I thought I discovered it because like I was the only one that I was aware of creating a software that could do certain things. But it was one of those ideas that was like not. It was kind of it was like an obvious progression, and this happens a lot of times where you hear about somebody discovered the light bulb in two different continents in the world at the same time, like independently of each other. I don't remember if it was the light bulb, but a lot of inventions end up happening in two places in the world at the same time. And these people didn't know each other, and yet they invented the same thing at the same time. And I think this happens a lot, probably in business, where you think it's a really unique idea, but really it's not that unique. So, maybe it helps if your idea is really, really unique. Because if it's not, then you might end up getting steamrolled by some bigger group or, some bigger company can just say, hey, we observed this guy getting successful. Like, let's say you're Google and you're watching all of your YouTubers, and then all of a sudden there's like this breakout. Like, Google Trends is watching all of these breakout keywords, and they see a nice breakout and they think, oh, that kind of fits with our strategy over here. And we can just like allocate, $50 million to just steamroll over this guy. Or maybe we can just hire him and then, you know, either crush that business and create something else, or like use this person to our advantage, and so that we can own that category. And Facebook was caught doing the same thing. Like, Facebook got caught. I don't know if they got sued, but what they would do is they would find one of their partners that was successful. Then they just like cut off that partner's access, and then they just like launch something that was almost exactly the same. And that way they could keep 100% of the profit instead of having to share the profit. So anyway, you always have to be worried about a bigger player coming in. Like even with WordPress hosting, I was one of the first companies offering WordPress hosting, but then another company came in with venture capital, which now you know them as WP Engine. I'm pretty sure they copied some of my stuff. Like, I remember going to their site and seeing like they were using some of the language that I was using. Of course, like I was, pea size compared to what they're doing. So uh, it wasn't like it even mattered that they were copying stuff from me. And maybe they weren't copying from me. Maybe it was just purely a coincidence. So, it's difficult if you come up with something new. Um, they say that as long as you're executing, that's the hard thing. So don't try to run your business in stealth mode, because chances are nobody will try to copy you. But once you start getting successful, you will have copycats. You will have people doing exactly what you're doing. And this is a total random tangent, but I remember one time my friend said there was a guy in our neighborhood that started dressing exactly like me, he, he down to like the color of everything that I was wearing. He wore exactly the same thing, and my friends are laughing because they said that guy. And they were like, "Look, there he is. He's biking away from you." Because I guess like somebody thought my style was cool and he was copying me. That was funny. I don't know why I just thought of that, but yeah, you will have copycats.
Why this makes sense. It's the same thing that I do where I'm like, you don't want to blog, you want to write on the internet. It's online writing. And I'm defining online writing as something different than blogging, right? I'm creating that separation between old category and new category. And then I can use languaging to then reinforce, well, what are all the things that make that different? How can I call that framework something? So,
and the next step then is to say the same thing.
And it brings it back to the title of the video, which is creating your own category. So, I picked up on that right away. He's not calling it a niche market. He's deliberately rephrasing it in a more simple way. So, anytime that you can rephrase something using common sense, you're gonna be able to reach more people. So if you find a business, maybe one way to find an opportunity might be to go into a category where people are using a lot of technical jargon and think to yourself, I could come into this market, start speaking in language that people understand, that new people understand, and then I could capture a lot of the beginners that are feeling intimidated by all of the complex terminology. I think there are a lot of markets that are full of jargon, and those markets can be very intimidating to newbies. And if you can speak their language, then you could open up a whole new market that's not being served.
Thing in 1,000 fresh and novel ways. And I guess if you think back to Orwell and his whole 6-step process of writing, like there's the fourth or fifth one is there a fresh idiom or metaphor that you can invent that no one's used before? Stale metaphors are the worst. You're literally not inventing a new category.
mm-hmm.
But the people who can step up, elevate themselves, like grab what they're thinking by the scruff of its neck and like pull it up a couple feet, look down at it and say, what is the fresh way I can put this that no one's heard before? Because there's like one idea of expressing yourself. What is the idea I have? But then there's like the idea of the idea, like the meta idea.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can get to that meta idea, then it becomes like arresting. Like people haven't heard that phrase. What does that mean? It's intriguing.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we're violently agreeing.
As long as, I totally agree, as long as you're still communicating the clarity of thought. Because the mistake, what most people do there is they aim for clever instead of being clear. Right. 100%. And so they're like, oh, if I'm just clever, I'm witty. Oh, what a cool pun. Right. But what they don't realize is that the reader's literally sitting there going, I don't actually know what you're saying. And if I don't know what you're saying, it could be as clever as you want, but I'm just scrolling right past it because I'm like, I don't get it.
And people won't even admit that they don't get it. They'll just, like you said, they'll just keep scrolling. So there's a lot of information out there, I think, that's being overlooked because people just can't understand it. And it's sad because a lot of that's just lack of education. People just were not educated, or they just had terrible teachers, or they just they didn't care about school because they just didn't believe in getting a good education. Maybe because they had horrible parents. I think a lot of it comes down to parenting, and kids that don't trust their parents, they're not going to trust the education system. Like, how can you possibly trust the education system if you don't even trust your parents? So I think that's part of the problem is this. I mean, of course, the problem has always been there. Like, there's always going to be more dumb people than smart people. But I think the problem is getting worse. I think people are just getting dumber and dumber every year. And in ways, people are getting smarter. But in terms of language and vocabulary and communication, I think vocabulary and communication is going downhill. But maybe people are finding. I don't know. What do you think? What do you think? Are people getting better at communicating, or is it going in the other direction? Or maybe people are just finding new ways to communicate, which doesn't really involve language. I don't know. But to me, it seems like, yes, it's a universal problem that's always existed, but at the same time, I think that people in the past were better educated.
Yeah, I when I was in grad school, I had an instructor, a professor, seal a note to me in an envelope and pass it to me at the end of the semester. And he said, "Your writing suffers from your constant search for a novel phrase." And I just...
The honesty in that is remarkable.
Absolutely. It changed my writing forever. And the other exercise that changed my writing forever was a college professor who said, write 2 pages on any topic that you want and do not use any conjugated form of the verb to be. So was, were, is, are, etc. And I had forces you to use only active verbs, and it changed my writing forever. I never write ever without that.
How do you know what that means?
Exercise in my head.
No, he's talking about active voice.
And short declarative active verbs. Obviously, it's like the number one thing people learn when they write is not passive voice. But that, there's one thing to understand conceptually not using passive voice, and there's another like difference in forcing yourself never to use passive voice ever. And then, of course, there's wonderful times that you do want to use passive voice for lots of mechanical and stylistic reasons. But anyway, just sharing those.
Yeah, I was actually, so pulling on that thread a little bit, because, I've done a ton of ghostwriting too. And what's really interesting, my opinion on this has changed a lot over the years, is like, you can look at language very mechanically, and be like, oh, you should always use active voice instead of passive voice, whatever. But there are a lot of situations where things that the average person might say, oh, that's grammatically incorrect, or they would be like, oh, that's passive voice. You don't want to use passive voice. Like, in actuality, you do want to use it because you want the phrase to come off a certain way.
Absolutely, yeah.
Or beyond that, the real thing, this has been like, there's the literature, geek in me, almost, I hate saying this, but at the same time, I can't acknowledge that it's not true. I mean, it's true, is that all of the language stuff comes second to one thing. And it's, but fundamentally, what are you saying?
Yeah. So every time I sit down to write, I have to look up at the ceiling and say, what am I trying to say?
Right? Okay.
That's
So
rescues you.
The example that I use all the time, and I do this exercise with, after Ship 30, we have kind of a smaller, more intimate cohort called Write the Ship. And this exercise that I do is I go, okay, everyone, I want you to, if we do it live on Zoom, put it in chat, if you write it out. I want you to list out, we're all going to write an article about how to have an effective morning routine. So I want you to write all the things that you would put in your article about effective morning routine, right? And everyone always says the same things, right? Wake up, drink a big glass of water, stretch, exercise, journal, greet the day, right? Like it's all the same stuff, right? And then you finish and I tell everyone, okay, now let's pull it back and let's all look at all these answers and they're all the same. And then I go, okay, my morning routine article, just for the sake of an argument, is when I wake up, the first thing that I do is I take a shot of tequila. And now all of a sudden, no one remembers anything about all of the other things that got said because they're all the same. They are fundamentally all saying the same thing, but everyone remembers the shot of tequila, right? Because it's different in the context of what we're talking about. So everyone, when we talk about like writing, everyone loves going to like, well, it's active voice, not passive voice. It's grammatically correct. It's this. Like fundamentally, none of that matters unless you stop and question the root. Like, what am I actually saying? Am I telling everyone to just wake up and drink a big glass of water and stretch and have a great day? Great. There's 8 billion articles online that say that. But if you show up and you go, no, step 1, drink a shot of tequila first thing, everyone goes, this writer's brilliant. Just never heard anything like this before. That's the secret.
Yeah. When I was a speechwriter,
I heard something similar to this when I was like back around 2000. Yeah, back around the year 2000. People were talking about the blue goose theory. I don't know where it came from, but this idea that women will be more attracted to the guy that stands out from all the other guys because he's the blue goose. So the concept of like the blue goose is like some kind of really weird looking person is going to stand out more. And I guess that's the same concept. There's also the Black Swan event, which is a little bit different. The Black Swan is like an event that no one really expected, but has very impactful consequences, like the COVID-19 pandemic. Anyway, I guess I sort of missed his point. I mean, he is like being different for the sake of being different. I don't really know if that's like a good strategy. I mean, I think there will be a certain number of people that say, well, yeah, the tequila shot thing might get my attention, but I would probably close the browser window at that point because it's just, I just, I don't really, I don't see that working too well. Taking a shot of tequila in the morning. Like maybe if it was like 100% blue agave tequila and you had some kind of like scientific explanation. The thing that stands out for me with those morning routine videos, well, the few things stand out for me. One would be the cold shower idea. Like to me, that just sounds horrible. But for some people, they swear that, the cold shower is, gets your circulation moving or something. Like I used to know a guy on my track team, and before every race, he would dunk his head into a bucket of ice water. And this guy was really fast. I mean, he would win the mile race. Like he beat a lot of schools. Like he just beat everybody. And that was he just ran the mile. He could run the mile faster than 99% of people. And I don't know if he was superstitious, but or if it was actually there's some science to it, but he would always dunk his head in the bucket of ice water, and that just worked for him. So that's what he did. And I thought that was so amazing because I would always come in last place. Like, I just genetically, I just, I didn't have it. Like, I would train all summer. I would be the fastest on the team for the first day coming back from summer because I had trained all season. But within 3 days, I was back to last place again because everybody else they would just get back their natural talent, within 3 days, and I was back to I was back to last place. So no matter how hard I trained, it just there's probably stuff I could have done if I was really, really serious about running. I probably could have worked on my nutrition maybe, or taken some kind of one of my doctors said, there is something that we could give you to increase your lung, your lung capacity or something like that. Anyway, I'm getting off on a tangent, but another part of the morning routine thing that I remember, one of the best morning routine stories I heard was, I'm forgetting the guy's name, but he's a guy that started a business in the Philippines, and he created a whole niche market about outsourcing to the Philippines. And his morning, I couldn't exactly tell you what it was about his morning routine that was special. Like, I couldn't tell you the specific thing, but the fact that the lifestyle that he described to me seemed really, really like luxurious. And it wasn't even his routine that impressed me, but it was more of like the luxury of his morning routine that I found interesting more than the actual individual parts of his routine. My morning routine is not something I would want to share, but maybe I should, because I think it would be quite different. I think it would be pretty unusual compared to what a lot of people say about their morning routines. And yeah, so I guess if you have unconventional thoughts, your first intuition might be to hold those things back because you think, well, people are just going to think I'm weird. But I think what Cole is saying, maybe that you could use those weird routines or those weird ideas to your advantage, because it might stand out. People might remember you just because you're the guy that does the weird thing that nobody else does. So I don't know. Definitely, I guess that's something to think about.
Some number of years ago, when I was first adjusting to that role, my boss brought me into his office and he said, look, there's a mechanical side to writing. And that's the side you have to nail first, because I don't want you to waste my time having to edit basic grammatical mistakes, for example. But there's also a creative side to writing. And that's where it gets to the elegance, the style, and all of this. But you have to marry those two things together in a way that, in Orwell's words, lets the meaning choose the word and not the other way around. And it has to be crystal clear. There can't be a sentence in there that misleads, that confuses you. It's like the only possible product of sloppy thinking is sloppy writing. So unscrew your thinking first, get the ideas clear, logically order them, present them. But I think you're saying take it to another level. Like make them.
There's a step before that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so can you nail that point home? What is that step like sort of practically?
It's literally before you write a single word is it's so simple that it's complicated, right? Is like, but what are you saying? Are you saying, so here's a bunch of just extreme examples, right? Are you saying that we should play electric guitar, or are you saying we should play acoustic guitar? Are you saying we should go north, or are you saying we should go south? Are you saying we should play golf, or are you saying we should play hockey? Right? Like, people don't actually take the time to think about root of root of root.
I
like,
see. What you're saying
what
is, what's the one big idea that you're trying to convey? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, like, where are we going with this?
Yeah.
Right.
So, again, when I was speech writing, the first words that separate boss would say, enter the room and say, "What's the headline? Like, what are we
saying?
The thing? Yeah, what are we saying?"
And it's so simple that it's complicated. And what I notice writers do over and over again, right, is they go right in and they're like, I'm going to write about writing advice. Right. And you're like, okay, that's very broad. Okay. What are you saying? Like, are we telling people? And that's why I share all these templates, because it at least helps frame the thinking. It's like,
I can't read their mind or his mind here, but I think one way to look at this is a lot of times we don't say the obvious because it's obvious to us, but it's not obvious to other people. So, especially in writing or when you're selling something or when you're creating your product, you got to make sure to say the obvious, because if you don't, then people might be lost. They might be confused. Like, you might think, okay, they'll just figure that out because it's just obvious, but to other people, it might not be obvious. So don't just assume that you're not neglecting to tell people what they need to know. So you might want to, get a friend to review what you did, and just ask them, say, look, when you're going through this, if you're lost at any point, or like I didn't explain something, like, let me know what I should have said, or like, let me know what I missed, or let me know where you got stuck or lost, because maybe I could make another video kind of introducing the idea, or, maybe I just need to re-record that video so that it makes more sense. With writing, you can just click into that paragraph and just start expanding. You can just start expanding and say, okay, the reason why we're doing this is, let's introduce this new concept because, and here's why. And, you don't want to jump too fast. There's a lot of times where I go into detail where I don't need to go into detail because it should be obvious. But if you're trying to teach people something, it doesn't necessarily hurt to reiterate the same point 2 times, 2 different ways. Just as long as the information is a little bit different each time. I don't really like to repeat myself, but I don't think it's not so bad if you're repeating yourself in a slightly different way and are giving examples. But I know one problem that I have for sure is when I'm talking to people and I go from one subject to the next and I don't really explain the connection between the 2 subjects, because, like, to me it seems obvious, but then for other people, I just know this happens because people have told me, like, I don't understand how you got from this subject to that subject. And then then once I explain it to them, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense. But you can't always assume that people are following how you're, getting from one subject to the next. So I think that's important.
Are you saying the reasons why people should write? Are you saying the mistakes that writers make? Are you saying how someone can write a better sentence? Like, specifically, what are we talking about?
Well, oftentimes that won't emerge, the nut graph, if you will, until 60% through the writing process, if not later.
That's completely right. I mean, because I can acknowledge for years I kind of subscribe to the wastewater technique. You're just filtering, and then 70% of the way you go, oh, now I understand what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, exactly.
And most people start there, and that's fine. But a couple years ago, again, this friend of mine, Craig, I remember we did a writing session at his place. He lives in this amazing house here in LA, and I'm sitting in his office, and we're looking out over the hills, and he goes, all right, we're going to write for 2 hours. And I sat down, we do the first hour, and he turns to me and he's like, how's the writing going? I'm like, good. I got like 3 pages done. and I turned to him and I go, how's the writing going? And he goes, I think I've almost got the headline figured out.
Incredible.
And we were coming at it from 2 completely different angles. I'm just like writing and figuring it out as I go. And he's literally sitting there playing with individual words, being like, what's the headline, right? Like, what am I actually trying to say? I went through this whole debate with him and me, and I was like, I would never start with the headline. Why would you start there? Like, and he was the one who really instilled in me, like, if you don't know what your North Star is, you're going to write for 20 hours and not have made any progress. You have no idea what you're actually saying. And so over the past few years, I've really retrained my whole thinking. It's like a basketball player being like, I'm great with my right hand. I got to learn how to play with my left hand.
Yes, I understand.
And I've rethought my whole thinking now.
No, I think that's great advice. There's just different approaches, and maybe you won't get that perfect headline unless you go through the thought process of writing everything down. And sometimes when you're writing your thoughts down, you're able to discover things that you couldn't do just by listening to your inner dialogue. So, of course, it is possible. You could just be listening to the inner dialogue and getting it all kind of written down in your mind. And then you, like, let's say, come up with like this brilliant headline. But sometimes, writing those 3 pages is what it takes for you to get that brilliant headline that you need. So, there's advantages, disadvantages, but maybe it's worth trying both. It might be worth like let's just talk about video instead of writing. It might be worth recording a few videos that don't really have clear intention, because maybe in the process of creating those 3 videos, or in the process of creating 30 videos, you come up with what he's talking about, your North Star, and that North Star ends up changing the future direction of your content creation. Anyway, I think it's a pretty interesting interview so far.
I actually write headlines way more than I write just freehand. And all of my notes on my phone, everything is like idea, headline.
Yeah, I think his argument is pretty convincing. Like, I think I just said in a previous video that a lot of times my headline will change based on the direction of the writing, and I don't necessarily know what direction that's going to take right away, because sometimes my opinion changes as I'm writing, or it really depends on the subject, because some subjects are really easy and other subjects, there's no clear answer. The answer might be really multifaceted. There might be like disadvantages to all the possible solutions. And then, I don't know. Anyway, but his argument to move more towards the title and using the title as your direction, I think that is a good argument for planning your writing in advance rather than just like being spontaneous and spontaneously just writing a bunch of like stream of consciousness stuff and then coming up with a title like that. So what he's saying, I think, is very convincing.
Line, because I'm trying to clarify it and understand what am I actually saying before I go take the time to try and write the thing.
And just to clarify, this is distinct from the idea of a clickbait headline. In other words, what is actually a great clickbait headline is something that is true. So if you hit on something that is true to you, that you can back up, then there's some maybe tactical ways to make it more clickbaity or something, or more attractive. But really the thing that I think you're driving at is like, what's the true thing that you've discovered and want to share? Is that correct?
Yeah. I mean, the thing, a lot of people bring this up, especially the way that I kind of explain learning how to write headlines. A lot of the feedback that I get is people go, oh, well, that looks like clickbait. I don't want to learn how to write clickbait. The thing about clickbait is it's only clickbait if you don't keep your promise, right? It's clickbait if I say, hey, here are 9 steps to making your first $1 million as a writer. And then if the 9 steps that I give you are, you got to try really hard. You got to really give it your all, right? And then you as a reader are like, you liar.
Yeah.
Like, you tricked me.
So that's why the Naval thread, How to Get Rich Without Getting Lucky, was so masterful, because it really did fulfill the promise. It was like, in a way that was almost like abstract and actionable at the same time.
It's clickbait if I say, hey, here are 9 steps to making your first $1 million as a writer. And then if the 9 steps that I give you are, you got to try really hard. You got to really give it your all. Right? And then you as a reader are like, you liar.
Yeah.
Like, you tricked me.
So that's why the Naval thread, How to Get Rich Without Getting Lucky.
Yeah, Naval thread, How to Get Rich. I think he's talking about Naval, the guy who started Angel List, but I don't know if it's the same guy. Naval Ravikant, I don't know how to say his name. The angel philosopher on making decisions, the CEO of, so that is the co-founder of Angel List. So I have not read his book. I don't know if it's a book or a post, but whatever it is, it sounds like it's a book, but it might be, looks like it's a book. So I have not read the book, but at least I know who he's talking about. All right, so it's on Amazon. Anyway,
was so masterful, because it really did fulfill the promise. It was like, in a way that was almost like abstract and actionable at the same time. It was like taking a lens, changing a lens for people.
If you write really catchy headlines but don't deliver on the promise, it's clickbait. If you write really catchy headlines and then fill your article with incredibly valuable content, you just acquired a superpower. And this is what people don't understand, is that it's not clickbait. What you're doing is you're creating what I call this curiosity gap. You're telling the beginning of the story and you're telling the end of the story, but you're not filling in the middle. So then the reader goes, well, I got to click to fill in the middle. And if they click and you don't fill the middle with something good, if they get like old bologna, then they're going to be like, this is disgusting and I hate you for it. But if you fill it with that sweet, creamy, filling and it's delicious, right? And it's like a pie, then they go, not only did I love this, but I want to read another 10 of your articles because I find it so valuable.
Yeah. And I'm watching a Hemingway documentary right now. It's an old one, but it's on PBS or something on Amazon.
Oh yeah, I watched that one.
Really good. And at some point in the second or third episode, there's this observation that writers who are excellent set a trap for your attention. And that's like similar to what people do with their very first tweet of a thread. It's a trap for your attention.
Yep.
The best threads, most likely or the best threads that I think could possibly be written, say almost everything that the reader needs to hear to understand. But there is a point at which the reader is filling in the gaps himself or herself. And the best writers leave that space where they're expressing themselves clearly, but the reader, it's like two comic strip. I think I've heard Seth Godin talk about this. It's like two comic strip panes. Thing happens in pane A or panel A. Thing happens in panel B. Reader fills in the gap. Mm-hmm. I think that's just a wonderful way of looking at it. And
what you're saying, people tend to say that this idea of it being a trap, right, is a bad thing. I know a lot of writers when I started to introduce this.
Okay, so what he was talking about with the panels, that's kind of a way of marketing whatever it is you have. I think they're talking about marketing here, where you're creating this curiosity, you're giving someone the beginning, which would be here's where you are, and then the other panel in the comic book would be here's where you could be, and then the missing part that's in the middle would be the content, which is if you pay me X dollars, I will help you get from A to B, or your money back, kind of thing. So that's one way to think about it in a more practical sense.
This thinking to them, they're like, no, I don't want to write that way. As if every movie they turn on ever, right? They don't love that first scene where the trap gets set. And then they're like, now I got to watch for the next 2 hours to figure out who killed who, right? Like setting a trap, quote unquote, it's maybe a bit of I think that's the wrong term for it, because then it prompts kind of this negative feeling.
Yeah, that's a good idea to when you're watching some entertainment, now you can look at your entertainment in terms of how would this apply toward my marketing? Could I use this technique from this show that I watch? Could I use this technique to help sell some kind of product, to get people interested in my product by teasing them with the outcome and then getting people curious, how they're going to achieve the result with my help. That's something that you could be thinking about while you're enjoying your favorite show. So it's not really, be a good way to procrastinate. You're not really wasting time. You're actually doing market research to help you sell products better. Sure. That's what it is.
But what you're really doing is you're just making it sticky, right? You're making it where the person walks in and goes, now I don't want to leave. And you can accomplish that in a lot of different ways. But the simplest way that I've gotten to explaining it is you just have to deliver your promise, right? if you don't keep your promise, you piss the reader off. If you do keep your promise, all of a sudden the reader goes, thank you, I love you, and I want more.
Absolutely. Talk a bit about your executive ghostwriting and connect it to the conversation that we've just had. And I'll follow up. What I mean by that is you...
All right, I'm going to end the stream, so we're not going to finish the rest of this. You can watch it on your own. And I leave it up to you to find the link. Just copy the title and put it into YouTube's search engine. But that's where I'm going to leave it with my commentary. I think we've already, been recording for 2 hours. So congratulations if you made it this far. Pretty good interview. This is the first interview I've seen with Justin, where, like the last interview I saw with Justin, I didn't really understand like who he was, and now I kind of understand. Okay, Justin is a writer, and I guess this interview is probably a little bit more interesting than a lot of interviews because you don't often get to see two writers talking about writing. I mean, a lot of times you hear authors getting interviewed by someone that's not a writer, but it's not too often you get to hear two writers talking about writing professionally to make money, to make a business work. I think that's definitely a it's a rare thing because writing is it's notoriously a difficult way to make a living. There are a lot of people struggling to write, like, for example, articles per, getting paid like certain number of cents per word or whatever. I mean, it's not a fun job if you're just getting paid per word and you have to really rush through creating articles like on an assembly line. I tried doing that one time and it was not fun at all. But you can make a living from your writing with a platform like Gumroad. I think you can definitely learn how to make better content by understanding how writing works and maybe practice writing to improve your videos. But I don't think it's necessarily a good strategy to tell people, hey, you could start a business by writing an ebook and I'll tell you how to do it. And you're missing out because you should be making an ebook and selling it on Gumroad. That to do that well, I think is extremely, extremely hard because people like these two guys, I'm guessing they have read a lot of books and they got probably a really good education. Most people can't just actually, Gumroad did interview a guy recently that he just learned English and he was already selling a product like within months of just learning English. I think that's extremely rare. But it's possible he was already a good writer in Spanish. So, he it's almost like he had the experience already. He just had to translate it. But my point is that you don't just become a good writer overnight. It takes a lot of work. But if you don't have all of that education, and I think there's a lot more people out there that are just good at speaking, they know how to talk. Most people do know how to talk, and they're more comfortable speaking than they are writing. I think that describes 90% of everyone. I bet probably 95% of the world's population feels more comfortable speaking than they do writing. So I would say if you're one of those 95% of people, you're better off creating a video product or an audio product. And those 5% of people that are really good writers, I would even say to those 5% of people, I'd say, I know you're a good writer. However, if you spoke the content, if you recorded your voice, if you made a video, you're going to reach a lot more people, because 85% of the people out there do not enjoy reading. I think only 15% of people really like to read. So your your market is shrinking by writing anything. And if you are a good writer, if you are one of those like 5% highly educated, great writers, that, someone like this that's able to take all of their education and boil it down to something that's really concise, clear, that makes sense to the average person, take that skill and then record the audio. Now you have the best of both worlds. So, in conclusion, uh, that's all I'm going to say. All right, so let me know what you think about this stream, recording, whatever, critique, and yeah, just share your thoughts, criticism, whatever. Thanks for watching. I'm out of here.